This right here, get it out of here. Soreness does not equal productivity in the gym and training setting. And now obviously that's a loaded question because the level of soreness we can experience varies greatly. So let's talk about it. Let's talk about fatigue and why muscle soreness is not directly equivocal to our productivity in the gym. And more specifically, let's talk about skeletal muscle fatigue and how that relates to strength and power. Look, I get it. It feels good to feel sore. It's tangible. We all want something we can feel. It makes us feel like we're actually growing. But is that true? Well, from a strength and power standpoint, it's not ideal to be perpetually sore and to feel perpetually run down. And now in this video, we're going to talk about skeletal muscle fatigue specifically. We're not talking about the fatigue that is just your day-to-day lethargic, tiredness, and so forth. Skeletal muscle fatigue specifically is defined as a decrease in power, strength, and force when it comes to and relates to a contractile activity. So if I were to perform a 3RM squat and I wasn't able to perform it to my best potential because I'm perpetually run down and sore, then that would be an indicator that I could have some level of skeletal muscle fatigue. Now, what does that mean by some level? So what I mean by any level is that when you're performing an exercise or a task-specific activity, if you are fatigued, it can come at any point. And now what I mean is that I like to picture it as a pecking order, right? So there's the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. And both of those can show signs of fatigue, and they're gonna do so in different ways. So in terms of the pecking order, over here, we have the cortex, the brain. That's what sends the message to, let's say, perform a barbell curl. So that's gonna send a message to the bicep saying, hey, we need to produce force and strength for this weight right now. So then it sends the message to the spinal cord. So it creates excitation of the motor neurons in the spinal cord. So the brain is now sending that message. It's going to the spinal cord, which is also part of the central nervous system. And then that sends a message to the axons of the lower motor neurons. So it's heading into the peripheral nervous system from the spinal cord. So spinal cord is like, oh, yo, we need to produce this force, this strength right now. Let's go, bicep. And then it sends it to the axons of the lower motor neuron. And then from there, once again, in the pecking order, we go to the neuromuscular junction. And that's what creates that excitation and that contraction of the bicep. So again, remember, it's not the bicep itself contracting. Our muscles are just slaves to the nervous system. So the brain sends a message to the spinal cord, which then sends a message down the axon motor neurons to the neuromuscular junction. So we have all of these steps. Fatigue can arise at any point. You could be centrally neural fatigue, so the brain might not be as quick, you might not be as reactive, or you could have muscular fatigue at the peripheral level where you just can't physically recruit as many muscles because the muscles are sore, they're tired, they're fatigued, they just won't do so. So when conceptualizing fatigue and thinking about when it can arise, think about the pecking order and think that it's multifactorial and there is no just one point when fatigue is always present. Now let's take it a step further. Let's talk about muscle fatigue at a cellular level. Generally, there are 4 things that could be going on at a cellular level in the relation to muscle fatigue. Number 1 is an alteration in excitability of muscle fibers. So this would be not recruiting as much as you normally could if you were not fatigued and so forth. So you're gonna see a decrease in performance with that. Number 2 is the accumulation of metabolic byproducts. Number 3 is the production of reactive oxygen species. And then number 4 is calcium movements in fiber compartments. And all of these could be indicators as to what's happening with muscle fatigue at a cellular level. So when it comes to performance, fatigue, and soreness, this video is not intended to scare you from training hard and heavy. I'm just saying that relating the idea that being sore and run down as being productive is counterintuitive, because if we are sore and run down, we can't contract as hard as we normally could. We cannot excite the body like we would be able to if we were not fatigued and sore and so forth. So that will decrease our performance from a strength and power specific standpoint. So as you go and as you progress through your training, this is why it's incredibly important to have a plan or a coach that can help you modify this objectively as you go, so you're not just winging it and going all out. Think back to the last time you picked up a sport that you hadn't played in years. How did you feel the next day? You were probably sore as shit. Now imagine going and having to do that sport the day after that, right? Would you be able to perform to your same level? Why are we doing this in the gym? Why are we continually running ourselves down to where we cannot perform the day or even the day after that to our same level because we're pushing so hard? So my 3 tips for everyone who has that mindset that they want to feel sore to feel productive: try to change the narrative. Tip number one is to have a coach and plan in place. Sounds simple, right? Then why aren't more people not doing it? Just simply winging your workouts, hitting these classes here and there, that's fine and dandy, but have some form of baseline plan. Something that I do that helps me conceptually stay on program is I make myself in-season and off-season programs when I'm not physically competing and doing anything to work towards. So I just ramp up intensities for certain blocks and then I'll scale them back, just like I would in an athletic setting, and it helps me periodize and scratch my itch for training hard and heavy and giving myself adequate means to recover in the lower intensity blocks. My second tip is to accept that when you start a novel stimulus or activity, there's gonna be a few weeks of acclimation. So let's say I'm a powerlifting specific athlete and I jump to a weightlifting program. I might have the strength to move the numbers that I'm doing in the weightlifting program, but just the different movement patterns and the task-specific activities I'm doing are gonna make me probably really sore, a little bit more fatigued than I'm used to. Give yourself a few weeks to acclimate before you start thinking about, am I pushing it too hard? Because any novel stimulus is gonna relate and usually result in some form of elevated soreness, level of fatigue, and so forth. The body needs to acclimate. So give yourself 3 to 4 weeks to acclimate to any muscle soreness and so forth when it comes to a novel stimulus. My third tip is to always be objective with your day-to-day training and how you're feeling. So something that I like to do that helps me a lot is when I'm pushing too hard and too heavy, it's usually not the first day or two after training that I feel that, because at that point, my nervous system is still usually pretty ramped up and I could still perform pretty heavily and so forth and train really hard. It's like the third or fourth day that I start to feel irritable, run down, and so forth. So my advice for folks who are very overzealous with their training and they are trying to scale back a little bit and figure out when they need to scale back is to give yourself a 3 to 4 day range, as opposed to just training hard one day and then thinking, oh shit, I need to scale back right away. Give yourself a range where on these 3 to 4 days, I'm looking for, am I stressed? Do I feel irritable? Do I feel really run down? Am I sleeping poorly? If I am for 3 to 4 days straight, that's usually a pretty good indicator that I'm overreaching. I'm reaching into that bucket of recovery and trying to take what I don't have in it. So I'm trying to perform with no means. So if you are a little bit worried about overreaching, give yourself a range. Don't immediately flip-flop what you're doing just because you do have a day where you're run down and tired. Those days are gonna happen. Shit happens, it's life. Things get stressful and so forth, and you gotta be mentally tough to get through them. But there are a couple indicators that I like to use when you're progressively feeling like that over a different span of days. So those are my 3 tips, and obviously every coach and program will have their own means of helping you understand fatigue, muscle soreness, and what's too much. But those are my 3. Again, hopefully you can conceptualize them for your own good. But until next time, see you guys.